Hungry Trilobyte podcast would like to start by acknowledging these fine conventions. SoonerCon, Oklahoma's longest-running pop culture convention, is ready to return in 2023. SoonerCon 31 will be held in Norman, Oklahoma on June 30th through July 2nd, 2023. Gaming, cosplay, autographs, and an art auction await. Visit SoonerCon.com for more details. The Hellmouth Convention, where fandoms bleed together. Evoking the center of the mystical convergence, our event includes fandoms and travelers from all over the world. Like the Hellmouth itself, things gravitate toward it that you might not find elsewhere. The celebration is scheduled for June 9th through 11th, 2023 in Los Angeles, California. Go to thehellmouth.org to plan your visit. On tap today, we have my buddy Jarrod Alberich coming back. How you doing?
I'm doing good, bud. Thanks for having me back. I'm attempting to become the record holder for appearances on the show.
You are in the running right now, for sure. And the reason you are is that you tend to be like the Swiss Army knife of podcast conversationalists. Because this will be the third conversation we have on my show, like the sixth overall. And it's never the same conversation twice. It's always a different tool out of our toolbox there.
we have a lot of corners to our nerdery. Mm-hmm. And this episode I'm excited about because this is a pretty obscure corner that you and I both share. And I've got to tell the listening audience, speaking of things that we share, we showed up to record this. We're on Zoom. We can see each other unplanned, both wearing a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man t-shirt. So apparently we are riding the same vibe in our lives, Aaron.
And so this happened completely by accident. I don't recall exactly how the conversation got started, but I was discussing sitcoms on Twitter because I like sitcoms as a whole. They're like my productivity entertainment. I can flip them on while I'm doing some writing, while I'm organizing some stuff. It's entertaining, but a lot of times I can just go along with the motions. And the world has this fascination with the Golden Girls. True. And yeah, it was like the big sitcom of the 80s. It's got a lot of love now. We all miss Betty White, God rest her soul. But people don't often realize that the Golden Girls was just one of a trilogy made by the same producers, and that the other two shows in that trilogy don't get a lot of recognition today. I remember a show called Empty Nest, which was the second in the trilogy that I remember liking a lot, but I hadn't watched it since I was 8-10 years old, something like that. So I just made an offhand comment that, does this show hold up? Does anybody remember it? Does anybody watch it? And you said something to the effect of, I don't, but I'll take the challenge.
Yeah, that's about right. Like, I remembered it. I watched this show growing up in my household. It was one of those shows that was sort of popular. My mom liked it. My dad liked it. It was a family show that we would sit down, and I can't remember what night of the week it aired, but we'd sit down on that night and we would watch it. We all enjoyed it. So I hadn't watched it since then, but when I saw you on social media asking that question, I said, man, I remember liking that show. So let's find out together if it holds up.
If that was the question. Does it hold up? Are these fuzzy memories that we have based on liking something when we were kids, or does this show have a quality we can go back to? And I went back to the show, watched the whole first season, knowing nothing more than that. What was your experience?
Oh, just like you, I went back and said, okay, we agreed behind the scenes. Let's watch the first season. I said, cool, I'll have that done in a matter of weeks, which turned into months. That's going to lead me into what my experience was like, because the reason it went from weeks to months is not a bad one. It's just, I started watching season 1, episode 1, and my wife kind of strolled by. She's like, oh, I remember that show. And she was sat down and watched it with me. And then it became a me and my wife show. Like, I couldn't watch it without her. She was like, don't watch any episodes unless I'm here. So I could only watch it when she was there. So we would watch them together. But my overall experience was extremely positive. I really enjoyed them. She really enjoyed them. We recently, well, when I say recently, within the last couple of years, probably about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, finished a rewatch of all the episodes of Night Court, and we really enjoyed that. And so I was like, I wonder if we're going to have that same enjoyment level. And it really, we did. We really had a true enjoyment level of watching these old Empty Nest shows that we remembered from our childhood. So that's my overall it was definitely a positive experience, and I'm glad I did it. And oh, by the way, for the listeners out there, if we're tantalizing you or lighting some nostalgia matches for you, I got them all off of YouTube. They're all there. They don't cost a dang thing. So
They will
anybody.
be linked in the show notes. There's a couple different versions out there. There's one account I found that has a very high quality version, with the exception of a little bug in the corner there. I think that that's the one I'm going to recommend.
Okay, yeah, I think my video qualities were they were okay, but it's a comedy, so you don't need HD for a comedy.
Right.
Doesn't make the jokes funnier. So let me toss the question back to you, Aaron. You went back through. What was your overall impression?
Well, first of all, before I jump onto that, I have to just acknowledge something that's going to come up very obviously. Earlier in this week, in an episode that's already on the feed now by the time you hear this, I got to talk to Jeremy Miller from Growing Pains, and we got onto the topic of what is it about shows of this era, sitcoms especially, that people seem to miss. And he said, and we said something very similar to what you and I just said. This is the type of show that encourages bonding and people sharing the experience, rather than something you're watching solo and you maybe go on to social media later on to talk about. This is a show you want to watch with people. That leads to the experience. So got to say that right off the bat. I think we're all onto something here.
Absolutely. There's a certain amount of their living room is kind of like our living room. Like I didn't have to watch an episode to remember the layout of the living room of the Weston house. I can tell you what the layout of the living room of the Cosby house is. I can tell you what the Family Ties living room is like. That there's something about you're in your living room, seeing other people in their living room, that creates that bond. I think that's just a theory I have. But anyway, back to you, sir.
Yeah, and I've never gone into any house in the real world and the living room is shaped like a trapezoid, but we always accept it on TV.
Good point.
But no, honestly, I knew that I was going to have a bit of a challenge because it's going to be formatted differently than a lot of the shows we're watching today. Even more recent sitcoms, there's a difference in tone. And that's one of them is because there weren't as many networks then, and the audience was trying to grab a bigger slight chunk of the pie when it came to the audience. There's this effort on older sitcoms to kind of do a little bit of everything, offer something for everyone. So there'll be some episodes that are extremely dramatic, some episodes that are extremely silly. There's not a lot of continuity or consistency in between the portrayals of certain things from episode to episode. And that's disconcerting for somebody who didn't grow up with this stuff. You and I did. So that wasn't a challenge for me, but it was a shift from what I'm used to in recent past. And once I got that down, once I slipped back into that mindset, I found I did enjoy it a lot. I really did. There were some moments where it was like, oh wow, that's not a joke I would have done today, or that's just plain dopey. Why did they even go that route? But you know what? It's part of the charm.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch when I watched it. I'm sure there was a couple jokes I was like, yeah, that probably wouldn't fly today, but like there was never anything mean-spirited. It was always in good fun, and like you said, part of the charm of it. And one of the things that leaped out at me when you're talking about sort of the differences between shows today, and frankly, Aaron, I don't watch hardly any modern TV shows. I tend to only go back to watch old shows that I've missed or I have these super vague memories of. I don't do a lot of modern television. But one thing that leapt out to me that is a huge difference between modern TV and this was back in the days when they were still doing 22 to 28 episodes a season. That was the gold standard. And I actually saw like a meme about that on Twitter recently where it was like shows of the 80s. Tonight on episode 21 of what season, whatever, is like modern shows. If you're lucky, we'll get out 6.
Yep.
And I was like, man, it's just like the commitment to the craft, the commitment to the bit, the commitment to the program is just, it's more palpable in your shows from the 70s and the 80s. And there was probably more commitment to it because, like you mentioned earlier, there was really back then, there was really 3 networks. And you really had to commit because it was you and two other strong competitors for that time slot, right? So you had to really commit to the craft. And now everything is so vast that it's so diluted. And I'm going to get deep on here for a second, Aaron. Like,
Please.
I think that I know you're talking about empty nest, but just sort of an overall thought that's just been on my mind for years now. I think this whole spread of entertainment to where now it's not three networks anymore, that it's a dozen different streaming services and your favorite creators on YouTube and this and that and everything. Like, there's so much now that I think that kind of contributes to some of the social divide that we see in our modern times in this country. Like, I know that sounds silly to think TV shows help, do a social divide. But my point is, there used to be at least this bond where you would go into work the next day, and there's a really good chance that at least 4 or 5 other people at your job saw that episode of Empty Nest. 4 or 5 people from different backgrounds, different races, different cultures, we all saw it. So it bonded us because there was only 3 networks to choose from. So I think there was a more bond around entertainment in general than there is now. Now it's like, if you find, I watch, this, like, here's what I'm trying to say. There's very few bonding shows anymore. There's very few shows that have such grab power. The one that comes to mind is probably Stranger Things. Like, everybody kind of gravitates to Stranger Things, and ironically, it's a period piece set in the time frame that we're talking about. But I just think I know that's really broad for a chat about Empty Nest, but that's been on my mind for a long time. Like, this big pool of entertainment now, I think, does more to split us up than it does to bond us together. But I'm not saying it's necessarily evil. I think it's great that we have so much.
It's a great thing
that we, so I don't want to come off as saying it's negative, but I think there was a real positive value in having those 3 network sitcom shows that were very relatable, that we all watched no matter where we came from.
There were hints of what you just said in the chat I had with Jeremy, and I think you and I are maybe better equipped to flesh it out a little bit here, because when we say there was 3 networks on there, that's a little misleading, because there would be 3 networks and then you probably have another 4 or 5 regional stations, which nobody really watched on a consistent basis. That was where you got your local sports. That was where you got your reruns. But there would be 3 networks. Usually, at best, 2 of them would have a really big show at that time slot. The other one would just have something that was going to get canceled after a season. So it was really down to 2 shows every particular time slot. And there was typically an odds-on favorite. So there was a chance that you could get up to 70-80% of the office watching that show, unless that person just didn't have an interest in that genre. Right. It was on at the same time. Everybody had the same experience. You learned not to call people when that show was on if you knew they were watching it.
Appointment viewing. I kind of miss appointment viewing. In one way, our lives are so much easier to manage without appointment viewing, but in some way, I think guys of our age, there's part of us that kind of misses appointment viewing. There's kind of a cool factor to go and looking at your watch and go, no, it's Thursday, it's at 6:30. I got to get home. The show starts at 7, type of a deal.
I advocate making your own appointment viewing. If you decide you want to catch up on your latest YouTube channel, you say you're going to do that Wednesday at lunchtime when you're eating your cheeseburger and you just flip off your phone. I mean, that's the kind of thing I think is beneficial to do in our lives, but that might be a step too far to the side.
I'm not going to fight you on that. Now that you mentioned that, I realize that I kind of do that.
But and to try to make a dividing point between modern content and what we're talking about here, I like to go to The Big Bang Theory and Young Sheldon, because The Big Bang Theory is kind of the last of the shows that were in this model we're talking about here, with the broader characters and the 3-camera format. And Young Sheldon, being a current show, its pedigree is all modern. It's got its roots in earlier types of shows, but I mean, it's got more advanced sets. There's a flowing continuity. It's set up structurally as much as a Game of Thrones, with a long overarching narrative that would not be recognizable in the 80s. So when I say I'm seeing modern stuff, it's like I see stuff like that as being like the last vestiges of what we're talking about with Empty Nest.
Oh, that's a fair point. Yeah, you had me kind of wondering, like, what was sort of the last bastion of sort of that network format? And I think you're right. I can't think of a better example.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they still exist somewhere, and somebody will probably bring it back. But the expectation on production values has gotten to the point where, man, that's not going to be the standard again for a very, very long time, if ever.
Yeah, the good news is for whoever brings it back and does it right and makes it entertaining. The good news there is the budgets should be relatively easy because once you have your
Mhm,
main sets built,
mhm.
I mean, Empty Nest was the Weston house and the doctor's office.
And it's remarkable
That's
how
it.
often the plot would bend around the need to have the action take place in one of those two locations.
Oh, absolutely. There was the rare occurrence of going to like one of the girls' apartments when they still lived away, or some other go to someone else's office, but like it was heavily two sets.
Mhm, mhm. And it's like people be like, well, why would you go to a doctor's hospital just to have a quick chat with him? You would never do that. But yeah, it made sense for the purposes of making a TV show.
Now I'm going to get specific about the show. I love the episode where it was just torturous for Harry to find out they were moving his office and
Mhm.
moving his practice. And I was watching that episode, Aaron, and I was like, I don't remember that. And like they were for real moving. And I was like, what? Why would they give up that set? And then the whole joke was they moved into a building where the office layout was exactly the same. And I was like, oh, and they had me. I was buying. I was like, what's going on here? And it just goes right back to what we're talking about. Hey, we have these two sets, and dang it, we're going to use them. We're going to make one of them the punchline to a really big setup.
And that stuff flew all the time. And one of the things I kind of got into last time, we was talking about why these shows are so appealing in a way that maybe the modern shows aren't or don't grab people. And what's the comfort value of it? And that is, all the characters tend to be likable, even despite their flaws. There's very rarely a time when you don't want the character to come out ahead in the game. You find yourself invested in their story, as dopey as it might be, because you just want to see that happy ending coming.
Yes, I do see a tendency in modern TV and filmmaking to where they will make a character who is unlikable because that character is supposed to represent this segment of society that I don't like.
Mhm.
So I'm going to make a character that represents them and we can all hate them. And I'm like, anytime you build something around the concept of, hey, we can all hate this, it's not a really great formula for
No.
success. I mean, I get what you're doing. And throughout these episodes of Empty Nest, there are unlikable characters that show up and have to be dealt with.
Mhm.
Right. But to get to the core of what you're saying, even the smarmiest character, just Charlie,
I love Charlie.
is lovable. Like he's lovable because he's an idiot. Like he's again, there's nothing mean spirited about Charlie. He's just
Mhm.
not smart enough to realize what he's doing.
Right. And I remember it being, an 8, 9-year-old kid, and Charlie was by far my favorite character.
Oh yeah.
I loved everything the guy did. I lit up when he came on. Then I'm realizing this is not a dude I should have been using as a role model at 8 years old.
No, he's a terrible person, but like it's embraced in a way that makes him likable. Like in
Mhm.
modern storytelling, TV or movies, they would just make him so dislikable, and you'd be like, yeah, I get it, nobody should be that way, but like they were able to say, hey, nobody should be this way, but these people do exist, and he's not evil, he's just dumb.
Mhm.
And there's a lovable quality about him. And there are so many shows like that. Like if you think back to some of the other shows, like almost every show had that person who was like just sort of like a sex maniac, who
Mhm.
was not that bright. I could think of other shows that had sort of that character built into them. It was very much a staple of of the 80s. But David Leisure, the actor, really uh, was able to put on this. I guess the only phrase I can use is likable smarminess. Is that a, is
Mhm.
that a thing? Likable smarminess, patented right here.
Obviously, an extension of the Joe Isuzu character that pretty much was the prototype for Charlie there. I
Oh goodness.
Okay, I was just you got the reference right, because
What'd you say?
the Joe Isuzu character.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah.
Yes, yeah, that was the proto Charlie right there.
Oh, so wait a minute. You just blew my mind because I know that David Leisure was Joe Souza.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that predated this.
I'm pretty sure it did. I
I
can look it up
thought
to be
it was a
sure.
spinoff of the, and you're probably right. It's just in my mind, I always thought he did Joe Suzu after this, but
No, because I'm pretty sure this came first, and they
This-
said this works so well, and this dude nails that so much.
oh
Let's
my
just roll with
goodness.
it.
I 100% hope you're right, because I have a very foggy memory of it. But like
Well, yeah, I mean, we're
the second
young.
you said Joe Suzu, was like Joe's, yeah. Oh, that was David Leisure. I thought, I think he did those after, but you know what? I'm the wrong person to ask, because this show started in 1988 and I was living in Germany and we did not get it. I didn't start watching this show until the early 90s when we returned from Germany. So my timeline for it's probably pretty wonky.
Okay, Joe Zuzu, the first appearance was in 1986.
Look at you, just blowing my mind on this episode.
And you said this was 1988. This show premiered.
Yep.
Okay, I just didn't want to say the wrong thing there.
No, you nailed it. And that's great, because you like fix this timeline in my head, because I always assumed that the Suzu folks were like, oh, we really like this character from Empty Nest, do some commercials with him. And it's the opposite. Like he showed that quality in the commercial, and you blew my mind. You blew my mind here on the episode.
Well, and it's like there's so many weird intersections that you see here. Like most people don't realize that Golden Girls had not one but two spinoffs, which were all very close in operation back in the day. Characters would be swapped back and forth between them. People got invested in sitting down for it was like a movie night sometimes, when the 3 episodes would be lined up together and they would have one overarching story, and that was something to talk about for sure.
I'll tell you what is killing me right now, Aaron. When
Okay.
you reveal the answer, I'm gonna feel so much better. What's the third show?
Nurses.
Nurses. Okay. That's what I didn't watch as much, so I don't feel as bad.
As much as I barely remember Empty Nest, I remember almost nothing of Nurses, except for a few key episodes that I must have watched like 17 times. And I think looking back at the episode list, I think I stopped watching it midway through. I think that's why it's such a blank. I'm pretty sure I watched all of Golden Girls and the bulk of Empty Nest back in its heyday.
Oh, definitely. Like I said, we returned from Germany in the early 90s. And that's when I remember, especially, we watched a lot of Golden Girls, a lot of Empty Nest. And, as a kid, I don't think I even realized how connected Empty Nest was to Golden Girls. In fact, when you and I first started talking about this, I texted about it to my other podcasting crew over in Longbox. Said, hey, I'm going to talk to Aaron about Empty Nest. Who remembers that? And then Delvin immediately wrote, because Delvin has this amazing ability to remember theme song lyrics. He sent me, just started texting the lyrics to the theme song to Empty Nest, because that's what he does. And then I think it was him who was like, I'm pretty sure it's a spinoff of Golden Girls. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
What? And then when I started rewatching them, I was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I knew that. I knew they were like neighbors. Yeah. And within season 1, I'm pretty sure each one makes an appearance. I'm pretty sure all the Golden Girls make at least one appearance in season 1.
I think you're right there. I wasn't actually counting it, but I do remember each individual moment. Yeah, they did for sure.
Speaking of appearances, I know this is in the weeds, but I had to get it off my chest. It was one of the later episodes, might have been the last one, where it was kind of a neat little episode, because it was really about Harry as a doctor, sort of taking this one kid through the different phases of his life.
Yes.
And 2 of the 3 phases were famous actors that would be famous. One was Stephen Dorff, was middle school age, and then like college age was the guy from Friends, like Matthew
Perry,
I think. Yeah, not as familiar with Friends, but yeah, I was like, that's kind of interesting. They had 2 kind of big names, and an interesting sort of last of the season episode too.
And I did, when you mentioned the theme song, I had to check on it, because it occurred to me earlier during the watch. But the theme song "Life Goes On" was done by Billy Vera, who had a hit single "At This Moment" in 1981, which, if you heard the song, you'd remember it.
Is that the one that's "What Did You
That's
think?"
the one.
Yeah, which was featured
yeah,
on Family Ties.
Yes, which is another show I've been going through.
Look at the combined memories of Jarrod and Aaron.
Yeah. This episode. And it was interesting to me, because so often now, if TV shows have a theme song at all, which is not really a thing anymore, it's just a quick thing they did on a contract. The person who sang the song doesn't necessarily get a lot of recognition or credit for it. And like, this was at the time you had huge people doing TV theme songs. It was a thing.
It was a thing. Yeah. They're see, now you're bringing up stuff that again, don't watch a lot of modern TV, but you're right. There's not really theme song. The last TV show I can think of with a memorable theme song was probably Big Bang, and I didn't even watch a ton of it, but I remember it had a catchy theme song by the Bare Naked Ladies.
Yep.
I think. So yeah, bring back theme songs, Hollywood.
Hollywood's afraid they can't afford the screen time because you're shrinking episodes down to 22 minutes now. You don't want to take up 30 seconds worth of theme song.
Oh, that's right. And everybody clicks skip intro now.
That I do not like that button.
I don't like it either. I feel like it's a table setter, man. It gets me in the mood. I don't skip intro. I don't do it.
I mean, the Family Ties theme song was Johnny Mathis.
Was that Johnny Mathis?
I believe so.
Wow.
Married with Children had Frank Sinatra. I mean, come on.
Bring back the theme songs. We will not skip them. Well, Aaron and I won't skip them.
No, we'll be the only two people listening to them, but we will not skip them, damn it.
It's a pretty cool little theme song too. Life goes on, and so do we. I can hear it, man.
Like, yeah, you get what the show is about before you even know the show. And that helps when you're trying to decide, in this day and age when we can just decide, screw this, I'm going to find something else. Or, like the Elvis on The Simpsons, all the show ain't no good. It's like, you're going to give the show a chance if you like the intro.
Yeah. And it really provides a tone for the show, even though, like you said, sort of the show can be a little tonally all over the place throughout, not just throughout the season, but throughout an episode.
Yes,
it can be tonally all over the place a little bit, but somehow they always pulled it off. And I'm really going to start tying back these things we talked about. I think the way you pull off a really tonally wacky episode and season is you have grounded and likable characters to see you through. And like you say, even our most unlikable character, which is Charlie, the most unlikable on paper. On the show, he might be your favorite, and I would understand why. But they all had this really great quirk about them. We haven't even mentioned Park Overall, who I think is great.
I really wanted your opinion on her.
I love Park Overall. I love her. Like, this is one of those characters that I will never forget. I always liked her because she was very, very, very funny. She laid it on thick, and she was fun, and she was clearly that strong character who she ran the office. Harry's the doctor and it's his office, but she's the one making sure everything happens well, and she does it in a very funny way. And even when I was watching this show, I was probably 13, 14, 15, and I just thought, not only on top of all that, and probably because of all that, she's also very pretty.
Yeah,
like she's just when I say she's attractive, I do mean physically, but like everything about her is attractive because she's so just who she is, committed to who she is, unapologetically who she is. That's what I like about her.
Yes. And I mean, part of it, this definitely, they got the rough edges sanded down as throughout the first season, but the first 6 to 7 episodes, Park Overall's Laverne is like, if you went up to somebody with a sack of Legos and said, build a Southern lady out of these, this is what they would have come up with. It was such a ham-handed characterization at first, and they very quickly finesse her to show how smart she is, to show how she thinks, to show her sense of humor. And she's still a caricature for sure, but they make her a caricature that you believe in, that you root for.
Yes, as a resident of many years of the great state of Alabama, you see Southern caricatures a lot in movies and roll my eyes or whatever. But this is one of those ones where you're right, they didn't initially lay it on thick, but I kind of already knew where it was going. So there was no real eye rolling because they've proven what I've learned from living here. I'm not a Southerner by birth, but I am by adoption. I've lived here several years now. They've proven what I learned by living here is that stereotype that Southerners are all just kind of folksy and dumb, that can be frustrating because I've met a lot of really smart people here. And what they end up learning about with her and leading her to is that, yes, she is very smart and she is very capable, but she's still folksy. But folksy doesn't have to equal dumb.
No.
Right. So I would argue that, a quote unquote dumb character would probably be more like Charlie or Betty White's character on Golden Girls, where they're
Mhm.
kind of strip mining. They're not very bright, but yeah, they always portrayed Laverne as capable, still kind of folksy and backwoods, but capable. And I know a ton of people like this here in the great state of Alabama. I have neighbors that are very, very, very Southern, and they very, very much speak like this, but they're some of the most hardworking and respectable people I've ever met. So, I love the fact that it's so easy for Hollywood to go, let's make fun of this other people. And they didn't do that here. They
No.
got, and I think the better for it. I think they got a lot more out of the character because of it.
And Charlie on the flip side, because we talked about how dumb he is, and there was an episode toward the end of the season where he wins a dog in a gambling match, and he's talking about first racing it and then breeding it. And me being somebody who cares very much about animal welfare, like my head goes to a lot of dark places when I hear about something like this. And yet at the same time, I realize that's 2022 Aaron talking here.
Mm.
We would have known kind of back in the 80s, we're watching this, that this was going to wind up a joke. It didn't matter how the ball got rolling. We knew this character was dumb. We knew nothing super vicious would come out of it. We were just going to see a funny story play out. We just had to go along for the ride.
I see.
And that's when we say these things can be tonally all over the place. I mean, you look over episodes where how many deaths take place in the first season? I mean, we talk about Harry's wife passing away. The girls have a great aunt that passes away. But yeah, they keep bringing this up, and they each time it becomes a very different situation. I mean, Harry's spouse is treated with great reverence because they portrayed him in a great deal of pain for the first couple episodes, and it takes a while to shake that out. And yet, when the aunt passes away, it's just it's silly. It's silly the reactions they're getting, because it's like they're all worried about who's going to get what in the will, and it's something that you would have seen on like the Brady Bunch years, something like that. It's that kind of what are we even doing here? But that comes from the fact that in the 80s, when you were trying to grab so much of the audience, it's like, well, I want this scene to grab the people who want the drama, and this scene to grab the people who like the comedy, and this scene to tug at the heartstrings of the people looking for a little romance. And can we throw in a little innuendo for the teenagers in the audience, a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge? It was tough to put all that in the same pot in 30 minutes.
Yes. And somehow they pulled it off with a lot of different tones. But it's interesting that you mentioned, put a little wink nudge to the teenagers, because remember, I told you, peak of watching this was 13, 14, 15 for me. Mm-hmm. And if you think about the bones of what makes this show, there's nothing in there that should appeal to 13 for this. It's a seniors show. Mm-hmm. It's an adult show, much like Golden Girls, much like Murder, She Wrote. It's kind of a show built around older people. So what is there for a 13, 14, 15-year-old? Well, it's there because they found that right something that make 13, 14, 15-year-old Jarrod say, this show is pretty funny, I want to keep watching it, while they still maintained their audience of the older folks and whatnot. So again, just as we take a macro look at these and shows from this era, it's fascinating, what all angles they kind of had to look at to grab that time slot that we talked about. But yeah, it's really well put together, even though there's a lot of tonal shift. And like you said, Harry starts from like, I don't even know if I want to date again, which kind of graduates into, I don't know if I can be physical with a woman again, which graduates into, I don't know if I can love again. And this is all in season 1, just kind of rebuild. He's kind of rebuilding from the way, stereotypically we build as from youth, can I take this next step? Because he hasn't had to take it in so long. He doesn't, he kind of has to take it slow. And it's neat to watch that happen. And we haven't mentioned his name really, but Richard Mulligan is extremely charming with everything he does. So it's a fun ride to watch.
is for sure, and they're having to. He's very credible as a man who's trying to date somewhat awkwardly, but is clearly very attractive to the women in his life. And he's very credible as a father figure to two grown daughters, actually three. And as a quick aside, it's neat how we establish there's a third daughter who doesn't actually show up until much later in the show and really needed to be there. So that was a very fortunate little trick done very early in the show. And he's credible with the children in his practice too. That's not something that you have to work to believe. So that it, we talk about how ham-fisted and broad these stereotypes can be, but he handled that with a great deal of subtlety.
He did. And like I said, kudos to him as an actor. He's just good. He's got a great look. He knows his, speaking of his look, like when they're like, they kind of keep pressing that he's about 50. And I'm like, he doesn't look 50 to me. He looks 60, 65 to me. And you know what? When the show started, he was 55, I think, 56. He was 56 when the show started. And I was like, man, I mean, I don't mean this to sound so. I was like, he looked kind of old for 56, because I just assumed, I was like, oh, they're trying to pass this 60-something-year-old man off as a 50s. But no, I mean, he ended up turning 60 while he was making it. But and that sounds like a negative thing, but he has a real charismatic quality that kind of lets you see past that, because just my jaded adult eyes, I'm like, they're trying to pass this guy out. 50. But that thought went fleeting out of my head after a while, just because he is very, very charming. You and I have talked about this on several of my other appearances, because it kind of has to come up by contract. For years I taught leadership classes, and I'm big on leadership and personal development, and although this is a sitcom and he's a doctor, he does play a real leadership role in not only his office, but in his home life. Especially, he kind of has to be that leader to work out issues between the siblings, even though they're in their 30s and they should be able to work out themselves. That's half the joke. He has to manage the wacky neighbor. In his office, he has the strong subordinate, who requires very little leadership, much more of a get out of her way and let her do what she does and let her help you kind of an attitude. So from a leadership point of view, he's a great character. I could certainly use him in any of my classes to say, here's a guy who knows when to step up. Here's a guy who knows when to sit back. Here's a guy who, this happens a couple times in season 1, Aaron, who knows when he's made a mistake and how to apologize. Because he does make mistakes. He's fallible. He's human, but he's also human enough and smart enough to not have a lot of pride, not let pride destroy his relationships, to say, yeah, I could have handled that better. Let's take another shot at this. And I think that's what makes him a great character, is that not only does he know when to lead, when to follow, but when to recognize his mistakes and address them in a really proper way. That's really, really strong suit. And I swear, and I won't bring up leadership training again in this episode.
Well, he's smart enough to realize he's not always or even often the biggest personality in the room. And he doesn't have to compete for that top spot if he chooses not to.
Right.
And that's something that, again, is a credit to the people writing it, because it's what makes these broad and silly characters get very believable very quickly.
Excellent point. And I guess we should make that as a compliment to the actor, because a lot of actors would say, oh, I need to, this is my show, so I need the spotlight. And it looks to me like Richard Mulligan was smart enough to say, no, we need to let certain characters shine and develop. Very much what I call the Tom Cruise method these days. On some of our podcasts, we've talked about some of the more recent Mission Impossible movies, and Tom has been smart enough to surround himself with other great talented actors as part of his Mission Impossible team, and not say everything has to be about me. Everything has to be about, he shares the screen. And I'm seeing this happen in the 1980s, 1988, with Richard Mulligan saying, hey, I'm going to surround myself with these other strong actors, and I don't have to dominate everything. And I think that's, so a tip of the cap to the writers for writing a character that's like that. And apparently Richard Mulligan was smart enough to let that happen too.
For sure. And I really would like to do more research into how these shows came about on the back end, because, especially when you talk about it being an older person show, which it very much was. I mean, I remember it happened in my house for the reason that my grandparents liked it. And that was kind of the standard in our house, is that if they didn't like it, it wasn't going to be shown. So that colored a
Gotcha.
lot of what I watched as a kid, just because it met that standard. And they loved Golden Girls. And I look back and I realized that most of the other shows on there would have been aimed at a younger audience, or at least showing younger characters and tending to grab that, what the TV is considered to be the ideal demographic, the 30 and early 40 somethings with disposable income. And here we have shows like Golden Girls and Empty Nest saying we're going to aim for the 50 plus crowd, and everybody, all the younger kids, end up kind of following behind them.
Yeah, again, I'd love to do the research, just like you said. I got to think that their plan was, let's win the parents and grandparents, and the kids kind of have to watch what they're putting on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the extra step they took was, let's not just ignore that audience. We know they're there. We've already got our hooks into the 40s, 50s, 60s audience. Those 40-year-olds especially probably have kids at home. So let's write it smartly. I don't know how they did it, what magic they used, but again, 13, 14, 15-year-old Jarrod, I was there sitting next to my mom, dad, brother, sister on the couch watching the show and laughing and enjoying it. Just good entertainment.
Just trying to think, what other shows would you have watched in the span of like 87 to 89?
87 to 89.
And you don't have to be specific on the year, but I'm just trying to see if you were to look at Empty Nest peers.
Yeah, I would
those peers have been.
Definitely think Cosby Show,
Mm-hmm.
Family Ties. This doesn't fit into the mold, but Unsolved Mysteries was a big 87, 89 era show. But as far as like sitcoms, yeah, I immediately think of the ones we would watch in the house would be Cosby and Family Ties would be the two strongest ones.
Yeah. And again, those were shows that would have older characters as guest stars, maybe even recurring characters, but they would focus on the mom and the dad, who were on the tail end of their 30s usually.
Yeah.
And yeah, because that was the traditional sitcom model going back to the early 50s with not a whole lot of deviation.
Right. It is. I wonder if the TV executives learned something about demographics and sort of maybe winning over the older people. Because you said something interesting. If grandpa and grandma didn't like it, it didn't get put on. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Because if you think about it, you have Golden Girls, you have Empty Nest, you have Murder, She Wrote, you have Matlock. These are all shows that I watched the heck out of in the 80s and early 90s. And each one of those four I just cited are definitely have more of a senior feel to them. So I wonder if there's just something to that. I wonder if like there's some secret formula back in NBC, CBS, ABC back in the day where they're like, all right, here's how we win over the grandparents. And if we win the grandparents, we win everybody, you know? Because I mean, what other Cheers and Night Court were really big. I think they were back-to-back shows on.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I think it was Cheers immediately followed by Night Court. And I would say those were probably more targeted at your 30-ish audiences. But also still very accessible to 40s, 50s. Yeah, they had to get in the end, Aaron, they had to cast a broad net, and to cast it to say yes to somebody who just walked into the studio one day and said, hey, I want to do a show about an older doctor who's a widower, and he's got these two daughters that are very different personalities, and we're going to just follow them through life. And somebody was like, yes, that sounds hilarious. You know, like, how do you sell that concept and to make it as good as they did? It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Well, and we should also acknowledge two truths that are not relevant today. One is that this was an era when you could give something legs to grow. You didn't judge something based on the performance of its first 3 episodes.
Yes. Here.
And this was also a case of where somebody had an existing project that was phenomenally successful, and they just kind of said, do what you want to do. I'm guessing, but when they came in I'm guessing there wasn't a lot of friction based on the fact that Golden Girls was making bank at that point.
Yeah, they had a team of people that knew what they were doing. You're right.
And there are teams like that now, but you still hear a lot of stories about people who are legitimately credible people who have trouble getting greenlighted because they're not, what they want to do doesn't fit the mold.
Yeah, now you're gonna get me onto another broad topic, but
All right.
I feel that way about a lot of media now. I feel like I guess there's more corporate hold than letting the creatives have hold of it. Then because I was talking recently, I don't remember with whom, but we were just talking about like just the proliferation of wildly creative things that came out of the 80s that just they wouldn't make them now. Like if you went in to a boardroom and pitched like just think about the plot and the whole storyline of Big Trouble in Little China and how insane that is. And you went to an office and you pitched that, people would be like, what are you talking about? But back then, I feel like there was more creatives running the show, and they go to the money people. And I think the money people they were just like, I don't know a lot about Hollywood. Here's some money. Yeah, that sounds good to me. John Carpenter, go ahead and make that film. And you got these like wildly creative things. I would argue that the 80s is one of the most wildly creative times for comic books, movies, television, and music. And I think it was just that last step before the money people started making more decisions than the creative people did. Also, cocaine was really big in the 80s. that could have had something to do with it. But I just feel like it was that last step before everything sort of got corporately grabbed. Because now we have the big easy one to talk about is Disney, right? Because Disney's got Star Wars and Disney's got Indiana Jones and Disney's got the Muppets, and I think they're like one James Bond away from having everything now or something. So I think there's just some sort of value. I'm going against what I said earlier. There was value in having everything together. I think there's value in having everything apart when it comes to making creative things, keeping your money people and your creative people kind of separate, trusting a guy like John Carpenter or Robert Zemeckis or Steven Spielberg or George Lucas to just let them be who they are and give you this amazingly creative thing. I hate to sound like an old man. I know I sound like an old man, but I don't see things as wildly creative now as I did back then.
I'm going to take a tiny point and disagree with that tiny point here, because I think broadly you've got a really great point here. But if you look at the things that from the 80s and late 70s, I have to throw that in there because there was definitely, that was a point when magic was happening.
Yes.
And you look at the things that we cherish now, it wasn't always a case of you took the creative people and let them be them. A lot of times you took them and you gave them a project and they got a check and they had to make what they wanted with whatever that check could buy. And when you look at the end result, you often assume they had more than they really did.
Excellent point. No, I will co-sign on that. I mean, the first thing that sprung to mind as soon as those words came out was like Halloween, the movie Halloween. I mean, here's your money, John Carpenter. You're not super famous yet. Okay, we basically raised a couple grand, make something cool. And I think limited constraints make people more wildly creative. And I think that's what you were getting at. And I totally agree.
It is. And I think we could easily get back to a system like that without tweaking the system all that much. If we just, instead of saying every project that comes out has to make $1 billion and fit into a larger universe, if we got to a point where we said, you can have $30 million, just bring us back something in a year and a half. And we said that to 50 people. I'm not saying what would come back would be everything would be roses, but I'd like to see the results. And I think you'd get a lot of mileage out of that.
I think you're really onto something. And I'm going to be giving that a lot of thought. I think I've had that thought, but I haven't looked at it a lot. And I'm really glad you brought it forward, because I think, yeah, limited. We talked about this way back when we first started talking about Empty Nest. Two sets, right? Limited constraints. Do the best you can with this, and people tend to make magic. There's nothing like a challenge to bring out the best in a man. That is a quote from Sean Connery in Highlander 2, which is obscure, but you see what I'm saying? Nothing like a challenge to bring out the best in a person or a crew or a team. I really think you're onto something there. I would definitely like to bankroll, 10 movies, like you said, at $30 million each.
I picked a number. I don't know exactly how much money you
Right.
should offer to try to get the next Ghostbusters, the next Indiana Jones.
Right.
But I'm saying you don't write a blank check. You give them a set amount.
Right. No, I'm with you, because like you said, and it kind of, that's what I was getting at too with my rant about how things were wildly creative in the 80s. Another thing about it is that everyone wasn't trying to, like, of course everybody wanted the big blockbuster, but it wasn't like the only goal. Right. It was like, okay, well, this one made a little money, but but these days it feels like, just like you were saying, if you don't get that immediate home run, it gets given up on, be it TV shows or, I'm a big comic book guy. There definitely came a point where if your comic didn't sell like hotcakes within the first 6 issues, it's done. And I mean, there's stuff as late as the 90s, like Darkhawk ran like 100 issues, and that it never would have got past 6 issues today. And you would have missed out on this big universe of storytelling. Maybe that was a bad example because not a lot of people are familiar with it. But the point is, things need to have legs. Creators need to run with constraints. I know we've kind of gotten really broad on that, but it really, looking back at Empty Nest, is a good example of that. 2 sets. Okay, we have a limited budget, but we want to do the best product we can to win this time slot. I think it starts with casting all the right people: Richard Mulligan, Dinah Manoff, Christy McNichol, David Leisure, Park Overall. These are all actors who I smile when I see them pop up in other things. So they brought the right people at the right time and made the right thing. And I just don't see that magic. I know it's not like an old man. I just don't see that happening as often as I used to.
No, and another thing that we have to look at is the idea of having the grand plan, the 10-year plan that everybody seems to have now, flies in the face of the fact that sometimes the audience has a different plan. Like you would have now, you're going to make a movie and you're immediately planning 3 sequels and this merchandising and these tie-in games, and then we're going to do a cinematic universe movie in 4 years, and that's great when it works, but we've seen cases where it doesn't. And 40 years ago, the idea would have been, we'll make a movie, and if it does great, we might make another, or we could make a TV series, or we could just sit on it for 10 years and swing back with a comic book. You always step back and said, what can we do with the pieces we had? Because the idea that one project was going to feed you for life was just not there.
And I agree. And I think that leads to a faster amount of audience burnout with things. I think we're seeing that more and more right now. I think we are, it's just my speculation. Don't take anything more than that. I think we're starting to see the flame out of the superhero cinema genre. I may be wrong. I could be quoted as one of those, be like the time George Lazenby said there was no future in the James Bond franchise back in 1969. He was wrong. But a good example, I think, is like Walking Dead was like all the rage. And then they were like, okay, what more let's do another spinoff show. Let's do Fear the Walking Dead. And let's be ready, like you said, with this comic book property. Well, it started as a comic book property, but they kept kind of building this, let's add that. And then it's kind of, it burned everybody out. I think there is, kind of to your point, a certain value in releasing something and saying, okay, let's see how that goes. Like we say in the military, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. It's exactly what you're saying when you're like, hey, you can have this great plan, Dark Universe, and it just falls apart. I don't know if you remember Dark Universe. Tom Cruise did the Mummy movie, which was the first.
Not really, honestly.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a whole bringing back the Universal monster movies. Tom Cruise did the Mummy, and they had Johnny Depp signed on to be like, I can't remember if he was Dracula or the Invisible Man. They had Angelina Jolie signed on. They had Javier Bardem was going to be Frankenstein. Like, they were going to build a whole universe out. And then like the Mummy underperformed, and then they were like, well, screw it, it's canceled. And I'm just like, really? I mean, I would have at least done a second movie in my universe just to see if I could get a foothold. But there, it's that weird immediacy thing.
Yeah.
Maybe over planning. Another thing we haven't even brushed on, the success of Empty Nest, Golden Girls, whatever you want to talk about. Do you think it's easier to succeed when there's no internet, when there's no YouTube channels that are already, kind of shooting down your concepts before they're even put forward? I mean, I've already seen a half a dozen videos about how the next Indiana Jones movie is going to be terrible. And I don't know. Nobody knows, but
no, nobody knows. And I hate that commentary, because I've always said, I don't ask much when you want to criticize something, but you should at least see the thing you're about to say is trash before you say it's trash.
Yeah, and that's kind of my point. Like there's an internet culture now that they didn't have to deal with in the 80s. In the 80s, you just put on a show. And we all sat down and said, what is this new show? And we gave it a try. We thought that we'd like it. Maybe yes, no. And that's how it went. These days there can be shows that are basically canceled before they even come out. Whenever you listen to this podcast, within the last few months of us recording this, there was a Batgirl movie that was filmed, and they decided not to release it because they're like, no, it's not good enough. It's like, okay, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. The internet had a lot to do with that. I got to think that if they didn't release it, it had to be pretty bad. But then again, like we talk about, studios are only interested in releasing blockbusters now. Why not give a try to something? I mean, if you didn't give a try to something like, let's say, a really obscure vampire character from the Marvel universe named Blade in 1996 or 7 or whenever that movie came out, like, would Marvel even be what they are today if we didn't light that Blade candle back in the 90s? Which is, I mean, let's be honest, by today's standards, that's a stupid risk. Hey, we're going to put out this Marvel movie from a character you've never heard of, and oh, by the way, if you look him up, he's kind of lame. But they did it,
and I really want to. I would really like to sit down with a bunch of younger comic fans, and without in any way attempting to disparage them, just have a conversation where I just have to say, do you realize when I was roughly your age, there was not a comic book fan on the face of the earth who would say that Thor was a cool character? Not a damn one.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And
I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying you're right. I'm just saying that shift has happened so profoundly that we just take it for granted now. It's like, and hey, I'm a kid who in the early 80s thought Robin was the coolest DC hero there was. And I was laughed at and mocked at for that so roundly. But now it's like he's one of the best. And I'm like, I was on board this train.
I was on board early, sir.
Yeah. Not that anybody cares, but I'm saying these shifts happen a lot. When you work with a property, when you give it some TLC, when you give it new life and new talent.
Yeah, absolutely. You just got to have that room to grow. You got to have that financial backer or company or studio system that kind of sees your vision and says, yes, go with that. Maybe it'll hit, maybe it won't, but I believe in it. And I think that's how we got a lot of those cool things from the 80s, including, Empty Nest, which, going back to where the roads diverge a lot for how we got to this conversation, but, going back to that, I mean, you made a good point. You were like, well, they had this massive hit with Golden Girls. They found a really cool formula. So I imagine it was pretty easy for the creators to go to, I think this was NBC, and say, hey, we've got this other idea. Oh yeah, we trust you. You know what you're doing. Give it a shot. That's probably what they said. Well, they probably said, oh, we'll give it a season. You know why I believe that so much? Because that last episode of the season was kind of weird. It didn't feel like there was going to be a second season, did it?
No, it didn't. And that episode really, it was fantastically written. It was touching in a way that most of the others weren't. It was a great way to wrap it up if they weren't going to get anything else out of it.
Yep. But lo and behold, they got 24 more episodes after a 22 episode initial season. And, and it all goes back to it. They were willing to risk it and try and say, well, let's do a season of this, and I'm quite certain, I have no paperwork to back this up, but I'm quite certain when they were shooting that last episode they were like, I don't know if we're going to get renewed, but we know we did our best. And lo and behold, they got renewed in 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, and 94.
Well, yes. And not only was it a very unusual script and one that they would have geared toward being a final episode, but it was clearly a very cheap episode to shoot because it only required that one set, only the one set out of the two. It had only two of the regular cast members, one of which was only in for a minute.
Good point.
And they just got a couple of guest stars, which I'm sure none of those people charged a whole lot for what they had.
That's true. There's a lot. I have in front of me a list of famous guest stars that have been on Empty Nest. If you're interested in me cherry picking some names,
sure.
Let's see. We have Mr. Don Adams and Lonnie Anderson, Garth Brooks, Angie Dickinson, Stephen Dorff, Morgan Fairchild, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Bobcat Goldthwait, Phil Hartman, Carol Kane. I'm cherry picking. Of course, all the cast is Golden Girls. Geraldo Rivera, Jerry Orbach, Barbara Mandrell, just to name a few. They got and I really cherry picked. There's a lot of notable stars on that. But yeah, it is a good show. Like I said, lasted 7 seasons. It's a little more fun background for you, since I'm playing fun trivia guy now. Season 1 ended up being the number 9 show of the year. Season 2 also number 9. Season 3 was its high point. It was the number 7 show in 1990, which is funny because I know that's when we were back from Germany and when I started watching it. So I like to think I was the one that pushed it up 2 slots. And then from there, it kind of goes down, and season 4 was the number 23 show. Season 5 was 48. Season 6 was number 66. And its final season, it was the 118th ranked show. Yeah. So I guess it did have a fizzle and a fade, but I think it'll always have a certain charm. I don't remember them ever deviating from the formula too much, but I'll be honest with you, I probably didn't see a lot past season 5.
Okay.
Which I think is about the time that the other sister shows up.
Yes. Christy McNichol had some personal problems, which drove her away from the show. And they conveniently had this other daughter already written in, so they just brought her in. And I remember enjoying the show, but not as much. And I think as I continue to watch, I'm going to be interested in seeing, was the writing just not working anymore, or was the lack of Christy McNichol really that profound that we needed?
Interesting. I did not remember that she had departed the show. I didn't remember that the other daughter essentially replaced her. I thought she was in addition to. I did not remember that.
Now, it was a new Darren on Bewitched sort of situation.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, we did acknowledge there was a transition, but that was why I was really interested. It wasn't like they invented the character. The character was written in from almost the first episode.
Yeah.
But just it wasn't necessary until the end.
Interesting. Now you got me wanting to press on, and I mean, I already like the show. I could definitely watch.
I'm gonna have to, yeah.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, that's going to be one of those things where it's like, now I've got to kind of go on through and see what it's like, kind of take the ride I would have taken, and just see if I actually did see it at the end, because you went through that list of guest stars, and I remember those appearances, even if I don't remember the story or what that character was like. I can remember seeing them on screen, especially Don Adams, because I was a huge Get Smart fan, and I can now remember Charlie thrilled to have met Maxwell Smart.
That sounds like Charlie.
Yeah.
I'm going to flip the podcast script here and ask you a question.
Okay.
Since we're sort of doing sort of an overall look back from our wildly variant conversation here, although it's been great. Is this show, I know you have fond memories of it like I do, but like, and I'm not going to hold you to this, but like, sort of like scale of 1 to 10 for sitcoms of the era. You know, if you had a top 10 sitcoms, where do you think this would fall in your list?
Oh, well, see, I'm going to have to say mid-pack.
I was thinking the same.
Okay. And only because even though I think it's a very good show from what I'm seeing now and what I'm going through, there's a lot of really solid contenders for the top few slots, which I don't think can be challenged very easily.
Such as?
Easily Alf, Cheers, I have my feelings about it now, but I can't disparage the Cosby Show.
Absolutely. I mean, as far as the show itself,
There were
it's
a lot of
timeless.
very, very talented people working on that show, and they all deserve to have their work respected.
100%.
I mean, even looking at the Golden Girls, I remember liking that show a lot. I like it whenever I see it now. So yeah, I mean, it would be very hard for me to put it at anything higher than like 4 or 5.
No, I'm with you. I think it's definitely in my top 10, but probably not, maybe not necessarily the top half of the top 10,
Sure, sure.
but I think it's very, very solid. And just overall, my review return to it, after not having seen it for 30 years plus it was good. I'm glad I did it. And, did it sort of fulfill how I remembered it in my head? I would say yes. And that's a good thing.
It's a good thing. I didn't have the experience of getting in there and realizing it was grossly different than what I'd remembered. I didn't realize that, oh man, I've been eating margarine all these years. It was butter. It might not be the way I make it now, but it was butter.
I like that comparison. So interesting. Yeah, I just kind of want to see how you felt about it, sort of the overall pantheon of those shows. And I think I would agree with you. And in case you didn't know this, and you probably did, there is a 24-hour streaming ALF channel.
I have them on DVD.
Okay.
So I'm set, and I actually set it up so that I can stream them to myself anytime I so desire. My only complaint is that the DVD contains the syndication cuts of the episodes.
Oh.
So I continue to search for a high quality source for the original cuts, which may not exist in a usable form right now.
I'd be interested to see if you do maybe try the ALF 24-hour channel and see what they're putting on. Because
I might do that.
I'm like you. I have all the, like, for example, Mystery Science Theater is my jam. I have all of them. I have them all on DVD. I have them all in my Plex, so I can stream them to myself whenever I want. But I still put on the 24-hour Mystery Science Theater channel, just for the hell of it sometimes.
When you go ahead.
No, good.
When you say you have all the Mystery Science Theaters, do you mean literally every episode?
Yes.
Including the ones that were never commercially available?
Yes.
Okay. Because if you didn't, we'd have a conversation offline.
No, yes, I have. Okay. I have every episode. Wink.
Wink. Okay.
I even bought, there was a box set that they had to pull from distribution, and I had that one pre-ordered, so I actually got it. I still have it physically.
I got that. Yep.
Few people that has the physical one because they had to pull it.
I got in under the wire on that one too. I think it was like I ordered mine the day before they had it pulled or something like that. And, yeah, and I just got in under the wire on that one.
It had like, wasn't there like a Godzilla movie on there or something where they didn't actually get the rights cleared properly?
Right. So. Or they had the rights and then lost them unexpectedly.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I remember them saying, hey, you can't get this one. And I'm looking at my shelf like, I've got it. Glad I pre-ordered that one.
Yeah, MST3K, I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but getting that on video was a 20-year project between when they first released the first VHSs and DVDs to actually getting that final release.
Oh, this again, it's a whole other podcast, but you make an excellent point, because I just now realized that I was missing 4 episodes, and I just found them and got them and added them to my Plex about 3 months ago. So that's how long my journey was.
I hear you.
I'll see you back for Mystery Science Theater episode, Aaron.
We might. We could definitely do that, because I love my MST3K episodes. That is one of my favorite topics ever. But let's put a button on this now, so I have a chance to plug you and all your projects and get it in the show notes.
All right. No more Mystery Science Theater talk for now. All right. I'll plug myself. You relax over there. All right. If you like these verbal meanderings that I just presented to you on Aaron's wonderful podcast, I have some podcasts of my own. I am on the Long Box Crusade podcast, where we podcast about a heck of a bunch of nerdy stuff. Come check it out. We have a whole bunch of shows, everything from Sherlock Holmes to comic books to action films to the Transformers to G.I. Joe, you name it. The Long Box Crusade. Please check that out. I'm also on a podcast called On Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, which is, you probably guessed, all about James Bond. Aaron's been on a couple episodes I did when I was going through all the James Bond video games. He was one of my interviewers for that audio documentary. That was a lot of fun. And if you're interested in checking out my art wares, I am at Yard Sale Artist on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And my website is www.theyardsaleartist.com. All my art stuff can be found there. Thank you, Aaron.
And you will see all that in the show notes of this episode on my website, aaronbossig.com, as well as any links to resources we might have talked about on here. At the very least, I have to throw that old Joe Zuzu commercial in there because that is necessary viewing for the younger audience.
My mind is blown. My mind is blown that came out before the show.
Jarrod, thank you so much for being here, and I would be glad to have you back for a 4th episode anytime.
Thank you, Aaron. I always enjoy chatting with you. You are a ton of fun, and we'll probably have you over in the Long Box Crusade pretty soon.
Glad to be there.
All right, thanks, dude.